Hi, I'm Bob Gimlin, and today I want to talk about 3 cryptids with confirmed and documented attacks or kills on people. I do this to prove a point, and that point has to do with cryptids and therefore cryptozoology itself. See, the scientific community at large held a closed-door meeting wherein they decided that cryptozoology is in fact a pseudoscience. Pseudoscience being defined as a collection of beliefs or practices mistakenly regarded as being based on scientific method. Clearly, I wasn't invited. The American Philosophical Society's Encyclopedia of Time, Science, Philosophy, Theology, and Culture, in collusion with Scientific American, and propagated by something called the Skeptics Dictionary, agree that cryptozoology is a, quote, pseudoscience with the goal of identifying and describing beings from the folklore and the fossil record, which cryptozoologists refer to as cryptids. These include creatures that are otherwise considered extinct beings of folklore, fictitious. Though as a note, Skeptics Dictionary added, such as Bigfoot and chupacabras. And I'm so glad they were kind enough to put Bigfoot and chupacabra in quotations, or else we would have had no idea what they were talking about. I take grievance with this definition, bordering offense. Particularly, the implied reasoning that creatures from folklore or the fossil record are discounted as pseudoscience. Identifying animals with a basis in folklore or fossil evidence is absolutely science. The giant squid was purely folkloric until it was verified in the 1850s. The giant panda, anaconda, gorilla, the obligatory coelacanth were strictly the subject of either folklore or the fossil record before there was any reason to believe that they existed at all. Even the discovery of the billy ape some 15 years ago was preceded by folklore. In fact, many believed it was a gorilla. Apes don't leave a strong fossil record, but fish certainly do, and the coelacanth was thought to have gone extinct millions of years ago, until we learned that Indonesians have been eating them for a very long time. So these are just a few, of I would imagine dozens if not hundreds of creatures, described with the use of folklore and or the fossil record. So let's get this straight. Cryptozoology is a pseudoscience, until it is successful, in which case it magically becomes zoology. That can't be how this works, and it doesn't make any sense. The academic community, with all of its conventional wisdom, in their closed-door meetings, as promoted by their advocates, may consider cryptids to be pseudoscientific and fictitious. But apparently, no one told the cryptids that, because there are still some out there, and some of them kill people. The United Kingdom is home to unidentifiable black cats. Much like Bigfoot, the photo evidence is shaky. Also like Bigfoot, we don't really know anything about them, other than the fact that they seem to exist. And there are a few options as to just exactly what they are. Skeptics say that the majority of these photos are simply misleading camera angles on ordinary household cats, though some have proportions of big cats, proportions that domesticated cats simply can't achieve. Some say that they are escapees from earlier circuses or traveling zoos, who are just barely interbreeding enough to have a small and unhealthy population. But I don't think so. I feel like a contaminated, both behaviorally and genetically, big cat would be tracked down and destroyed fairly easily. There were such sightings in Scotland in the late 1970s, and a puma was trapped in 1980. It is believed that it was an escaped pet. Are these cryptids escaped pets? Well, in 1760, a writer named William Cobbett reported seeing a cat, quote, as big as a middle-sized spaniel dog. He probably saw a Eurasian lynx. But according to the powers that be, lynx don't live in England. Anyway, escape puma and runaway lynx distribution certainly don't account for the modern, well-documented, uniformed, black cats described as the size of black labs or larger, living in the sheep-infested highland moors of England, characterized by temperate grass and shrubland, and by a low-growing foliage. Did you know a 300-pound lion can be almost invisible in 7 inches of grass? Anyway, there are more than just fuzzy photos of feline forms to prove these cryptids, these quite literal, hidden animals. The year was 2000. The place, Monmouthshire. An 11-year-old boy said a large black cat attacked him and left scratches on his face. A single image rarely conveys much detail, but according to BBC News Wales, of August 2000, the police called a big cat expert named Danny Nineham. The expert said the claws were much too far apart to be an ordinary household cat. Even an enormous one probably wouldn't have launched to grip the boy's neck from a crouch and ambush position. Fortunately, the cat missed its mark, and that's why we have a witness as opposed to a corpse. The boy remembers very little. Basically, he was walking, remembers being hit with something hard that grabbed his face. He screamed, and it disappeared into the brush. He said it was, quote, black, long, and slinky looking. Danny Nineham thought the wounds were consistent with an adolescent leopard mark, an animal between 40 and 60 pounds, an animal more than capable of dispatching prey much larger than itself, and then dragging it up a tree. With all the resources of a government facing public terror, the cat specialist took to a helicopter with heat-seeking equipment, but the biologist was unsuccessful in tracking the animal on that day, or trapping the animal on days after that. In fact, he found nothing. And as a note, this is an imposition of the United Kingdom onto Southern California. If a big cat expert, with the military's backing, couldn't track down a big cat here, then should we have high expectations to find something much smarter than a cat, in much tougher terrain, with exponentially higher and harder to fathom tree cover, especially as compared to the countryside of Wales and England? Especially when you take into consideration that there really are no Bigfoot experts. No offense, but if any of us were truly experts, we would probably be having more luck by now. And one difference between the cryptid that did this and the cryptid sketched here is that if the US government did manage to capture or kill one of these creatures, I suspect we would never hear about it. Anyway, 5 years after the Monmouthshire attack, to the south of London, in a place called Sydenham Wells Park, a man named Anthony Holder was tragically and a little ironically looking for his lost kitten in the nearby area. He called it quits, and had almost returned inside his house when he was attacked in his own garden. Anthony said this pseudoscientific pouncer was 6 feet long and that it knocked him to the ground and gripped him with its hooked nails for 30 seconds until his screaming brought onlookers and the creature fled. Anthony told the British Broadcasting Corporation, quote, I am 6 foot and weigh 15 stone. It was considerably stronger and bigger than me. This thing was huge. Well, Anthony, I'm sure it was absolutely terrifying, but it probably wasn't bigger than you. Cats are known for that kind of strength. If the cat was 15 stone, or 210 pounds, or 95 kilograms, I think the story probably would have ended differently, and not so favorably. Holder was lucky to receive only head trauma, bruising, and lacerations. Police and sharpshooters were called to the South London area. No shots were fired, though an officer did report glimpsing a feline described as, quote, like a black lab, only lower to the ground and longer. And that is what is so unnerving in the first place. Think domestication. Cats and dogs were bred to be manageable and comparable to humans. Even a German shepherd's dull claws and conical teeth are not designed for lethality, whereas a cat needs to be about the size of a garden gnome to have claws long enough to sever an artery. In 2000, the 11-year-old boy was attacked here. In 2005, a similar creature attacked a man just south of London, some 150 miles away by road. It is hard to say if it was the same creature. An African leopard's home range is generally 30 square miles, whereas a mountain lion's range can easily exceed 300 square miles. African lion's home range is typically 100 square miles. And these are the kind of variables I would be factoring in. But why bother? It is pseudoscience after all. Which brings me back to the initial definition. Cryptozoology being a pseudoscience with the goal of identifying and describing beings from the folklore and the fossil record, which cryptozoologists refer to as cryptids. These include creatures that are otherwise considered extinct, beings of folklore, fictitious. Regarding folklore, the beast of Exmoor, or a black panther, has been talked about in the UK since the 1970s. It became nationally famous when a rancher lost over 100 sheep in 1983. Many of the sheep were found with cut throats. So does it cease to be cryptozoology and become zoology because there were attacks? Sightings wouldn't have been sufficient? Was it because they call it the beast of Exmoor that it became cryptozoology? Where's the line? The black cat part of it should be a dead giveaway as to what exactly these are. A black panther refers to either a jaguar or a leopard with a melanistic trait or color variance. Jaguar don't really live longer than 14 years in the wild, and leopards even less. So it certainly can't be one animal. Sightings in the 70s cannot account for attacks 30 years later in 2000 and 2005. So is it a breeding population of escaped pets? Again, it just seems unlikely to me. But so do all the other alternatives. So what is it? Well, to be honest, it's a cryptid. The time frame of attacks and sightings, as well as the nature of the attacks, leave me confused. The only black panthers or large black cats I'm aware of are leopards or jaguar. And it is hard for me to picture a situation where a leopard or jaguar, seen here dragging a small rhinoceros up a tree, attacking prey 6 or 7 times its size, plucking a caiman out of the water, or feasting on this 16-foot anaconda, would attack this kid in such a way that he would walk away from it. So I'm not sure what these cryptids are, but I do know of a much worse one. This. In 1955, a man allegedly received a dinner plate-sized shark bite on the shores of Lake Michigan, in Chicago. The powers that be call this a myth because there are no photos or hospital records of the incident from the 1950s. In a time before computers, this shouldn't be shocking. Also, I doubt that doctors in Chicago even had a form or standard operating procedure or file cabinet dedicated to shark attacks. So the powers that be say it never happened. But that doesn't change the fact that south of Minneapolis in 2005, shark teeth were found in a Minnesota water system called Minnehaha Creek. The beachcombers were shocked when experts stated that the teeth were not in fact fossils, but freshly discarded teeth from adolescent bull sharks. Since the sharks were still shedding their baby teeth, it is likely that they had not traveled there, but rather were born there. The larger the bull shark, the more tolerant it is to fresh water because its body can retain more saline. The DNR said it was an isolated incident, and probably a shark or a small population of sharks got lost and isolated inland after the flooding of Hurricane Katrina in 2005, the same year the teeth were found. The problem, of course, with that is that the oldest teeth were shed 14 years ago, based on where, and the youngest teeth were shed less than 1 year ago. The issue of sharks in Minnesota and Wisconsin became harder for the DNR to ignore when in 2006, a year later, a bull shark was found taking refuge in a Pepsi truck that had veered into a lake on the Wisconsin-Minnesota border. The lake, called Lake Pepin, was closed for a while. But keep in mind, one 5-foot shark cannot account for 14 years' worth of shed baby teeth. Swimming in Lake Pepin was restricted for a whole year, but I still wouldn't recommend it. And don't worry, Lake Pepin has folklore behind monster sightings. The powers that be agree that bull sharks have a rectal feature that allows them to maintain required salt levels for extended freshwater habitation. They are well documented swimming thousands of miles up the Amazon of South America and the Zambezi River in East Africa. But Wisconsin, Chicago, Minnesota lakes, the ones I fish and set up game cams beside, a proven man-eating superpredator persisting, even if only seasonably, to the marshlands of the Midwest is by definition a cryptid, or hidden animal. And it is no pseudoscience. Big cats are scary. Anyone who has spent time in big cat country can attest to that. And sharks. Yes, I'm aware of the statistics, probability, extreme unlikelihood, and such that you're more likely to be killed by a rogue vending machine, etc., than a shark. Regardless, sharks are absolutely horrifying animals. Yet I would argue that they are not nearly as formidable as the final cryptid. It is the least definitive and most lethal. One with more kills than we will ever really know, and it's called the Lusca. And I propose that unique environments create unique animals, and the Lusca inhabits what is perhaps the most unique coastal ecosystem, the blue holes, particularly those of the Bahamas, seem to be the epicenter of Lusca reports. Some are inland and landlocked, while others are oceanic. Some are big, and some are small. These blue holes are exceptionally intriguing and mysterious, because as my shoddy Microsoft Paint depiction attempts to represent, they go far deeper than the bottom of the ocean. And according to Carew and Moore's journal entitled Blue Holes, Definition and Genesis, Carbonates and Evaporates, they are probably all connected. Less than 8% of these chasms have been even remotely explored, because they run so deep, and I would hazard to say that 8% is much too high a number. The inland blue holes are a favorite to tourists and locals alike. Seen here from the ground, they are particularly inviting because they have essentially no current. The water is often as clear as water can be. There is obviously nothing to get entangled or snared in, and inland blue holes don't really contain any creatures of any substantial size, partially because the surface is freshwater. With increasing depth comes increasing salinity. And since they superficially appear as independent holes as opposed to an interconnected network, they seem safe and serene. Until they're not, because these are the highways of the Lusca. In the mid-2000s, a group of young persons went swimming in a blue hole on Andros Island. This hole you're seeing here is also on Andros Island. So the scene probably looked something like this. A male member of the party, the one furthest out, was clearly pulled under by something, and never seen again. The survivors said there was no struggle, no scream. His head popped under, and he disappeared. They saw nothing more of him, let alone his attacker. A search was conducted for the young man's corpse. The hole was dragged, though obviously not to the bottom. Nothing was recovered. Not a trace. And this is not typical of a shark attack. Even the biggest of sharks tend to leave quite a mess of anything that's even roughly close to the size of a human. Blood and tissue should have been visible in the water if the attacker had those iconic serrated teeth. Not to mention that the other swimmers probably would have seen at least a dorsal or a silhouette in the pristine water, especially if the attacker was large enough to take on a person, or take off with a person, which a shark can't even really do. Whatever a shark bites tends to detach from the rest. It isn't so much swimming off with you, it is swimming off with a piece of you, which is actually quite considerate given the alternative. It was clear to the searchers involved that whatever took the boy literally did just that. Took him away, intact, down to the depths, deeper than any other ropes could drag or any other divers could dive, into the darkness and rock. So what made a healthy male swimmer completely disappear without so much as a sound, ripple, or sight? One of the first responders, identified only as Peter, even went as far as to say, "These are labyrinths. Anything can be down there." When asked why people swim in these blue holes, if they believe in such a creature, Peter said, "We all saw Jaws, right? But we still go swimming." Life is all about risks, I suppose. Dr. Samuel Gruber, a marine biologist specializing in sharks, located at the Bimini Biological Field Station Shark Laboratory, said that unexplained blue hole disappearances, with no evidence or trace, are, quote, "not a story. That happens. That's real. That's as real as can be." And he doesn't think any shark is to blame. Gruber says that plenty of massive tiger sharks and swarms of reef sharks have been documented in oceanic blue holes, but they sure don't seem to be able to get into the interconnected inland blue holes, because the connecting tunnels are either too deep or too narrow for any shark, particularly one the size of a man-eater, could endure. So we have people disappearing in tranquil, clear water, with no body or remains, and shark experts saying it's not being done by a shark. So what is at home in tunnels and narrow passages? What grasps without drawing blood? What is invisible? And what has the intelligence to pull it off? Well, there is one animal that fits all that criteria, and that is, of course, the octopus. And I'll start with the first criteria. As this video can attest, though the speed is doubled, octopus are masters of contortion. This octopus, which I believe is a giant Pacific octopus, is probably between 5 and 6 feet long, and weighing somewhere between 25 and 30 pounds. Yet as you can see, it manages to fit through a water drain that appears to be about the width of a deck of playing cards. They can fit through anything that their formidable beak can squeeze through. Because of their amorphous nature, the crevices that interconnect the blue holes would serve as a safe and 100% stealth, or cryptic, corridor of travel. And they are probably hungry after traveling. Second is what grabs without cutting. What is delicate enough and strong enough to envelop and transport prey items without mutilating them. This should speak for itself. They use muscular tentacles, aided by powerful gripping cups, to envelop a prey item and spirit it away, often to cache it for later, at which point its formidable beak can rip the corpse apart. The third and most telling criteria is what is invisible. Though octopus are obviously not actually invisible, they are about as close as possible. Their specialized camouflage is enabled by sensory organs called chromatophores. These skin cells rapidly mimic surrounding pigmentation in an eerily accurate way, but they also mimic textures of surrounding objects, or even water and light conditions. Smooth in water and abrasive on coral. I don't pretend to understand the science behind how that works, but what honestly boggles my mind is how it isn't really mimicry at all, like this octopus, which is in stealth mode by pretending to be a coconut. So on some level, the octopus has some kind of decision-making process to control these chromatophores, or these skin cells. What predator gives a drifting coconut on the seafloor a second thought? Which brings me to number 4, intelligence. Forget disguising as a coconut. Octopus actually use coconuts as mobile homes, camouflage, and shelter. They will hold on to them and incorporate them in their daily function. Octopus have the largest brain-to-body ratio of all invertebrates, which is particularly apparent in this mimic octopus, who enjoys a fear-free lifestyle by appearing as a cluster of, or a, hypervenomous coral snake. The skin even mimics a snake's scales, if you can make that out. Octopus in aquariums have even been documented to travel to different tanks to feed, and then replace the cap before returning to their own tank, which is conceptually what the Lusca does in the blue holes. I firmly believe that an octopus is behind the blue hole disappearances, or at least some of them. Science would say no, because the largest octopus in the Bahamas, Caribbean, or anywhere nearby for that matter, really shouldn't exceed 4.5 pounds or more than a couple feet in length. It is possible that the unique ecology of blue holes and their underwater passageways grossly exaggerates the normal size of octopus, following the principles behind why catfish explode in size when in certain environments, or different regions than their home one. And I have an idea regarding size and life cycle. See, octopus live rather short lives because females die after giving birth, and males die within weeks of the fertilization process. The action of sex and birth release chemicals and hormones into the octopus that essentially says, you did your job, but now you're done. So an octopus, with no reproductive drive or incentive, may not experience this. Perhaps some common octopus or Caribbean reef octopus, for some reason or another, are born or become sterile, via injury, or possibly a genetic pathology. If you happen to be a marine biologist with a penchant for anatomy and blades, try spaying or neutering an octopus and let me know what happens. If an octopus does not terminate itself by its own doing, then it is inherently susceptible to indeterminate growth, meaning so long as he stays free of starvation, disease, or predation, they will keep growing. And an octopus would find few enemies in the crannies and nooks of the subterranean blue holes. They would find plenty of food without needing to venture far from the marine blue holes. Or who knows what kind of food sources may be in the tunnels themselves. But sometimes, probably in transit from one place to another via the watery underground networks, they find food in the inland blue holes. And before anyone claims that this is all an awful lot of speculation, there's the matter of this photo, taken on Bimini in 2011. It shows the remains of an octopus. The creature was scavenged before washing ashore. This shows part of the octopus's mantle, mouth, or head. But based on very simple ratios, the creature was estimated to be between 25 and 30 feet in length. This is not a myth. These are the remains of an octopus, washed ashore in the Bahamas, 25 to 30 feet in length, wherein the average octopus is 2 to 3 feet in length. In the North Pacific, where the cold water is denser with oxygen, the giant Pacific octopus, tend to average around 12 feet in length and weigh maybe 140 pounds. The Bimini specimen was 25 to 30 feet in length, well over doubling the creature in this photo, putting the Bimini specimen at a conservative 290 pounds. A 290-pound octopus would be an unparalleled threat to humans, and certainly capable of dispatching human-sized prey. And unlike a shark, they could get away with it undetected. Think about it. This is part of the head of a creature that was longer than the largest confirmed great white shark. But unlike a shark, this one would have been able to enter or exit through an opening no larger than the drain of a toilet. These remains are legitimate. They were collected and examined by the Assistant Superintendent of Fisheries, named Clement Campbell, and turned over to the Bimini Department of Marine Resources. And I don't know how long an octopus takes to achieve this size, but in the years it took to do so, it was clearly unseen, or at least unphotographed. And it probably had contact with humans at some point, and I doubt it ended well for them. This animal was certainly more dangerous than the currently accepted apex predator of the Bahamas, the tiger shark. Speaking of which, local lore calls this animal the Lusca, meaning octopus shark. And I can easily imagine a Western scientist laughing at this absurd name for an impossible creature. Do I think it's a ridiculous notion? About as ridiculous as a tiger shark, bull shark, or nurse shark. Lusca was named because of shared characteristics, like size or danger to humans, obviously not an actual genetic matchup. But remember, science definitionally discounts folklore. Regardless, the Lusca exists as far as I'm concerned. You can see a fraction of it right here. It is demonstratively real. Whether or not it is responsible for blue hole disappearances, well, I'll let you decide that. But as an avid fisherman of Bull Shark Lake in Minnesota, I can tell you that there is always a bigger fish out there, and reason holds that it didn't get that way by being stupid. Oh, and if the typical Caribbean reef octopus is 3 pounds, but we found a specimen that is 300 pounds, then a 30-pound giant Pacific octopus can grow 3,000 pounds? Which is the weight of some whales, which some would call a kraken. So feel free to call cryptozoology a pseudoscience. But I feel there are still monsters out there, rooted in folklore, fossil, and fact, hidden animals that we cannot quite yet understand or fully explain. But just because we don't understand something does not mean it is fictitious. It just means we have a long way to go. Anyway, make sure to subscribe, because I have a lot more content soon to come. And as always, thanks an awful lot for listening.